Hello? Yes. Okay. Joey's in the water and he won't come out.
Excuse me, Dr. Breland. At first he wouldn't go in, now he won't come out. He really won't come out unless you're there.
Okay. We'll get him out of the water. Okay. Take it easy. We'll get him out of the water. Okay. God, little girl. Where are you taking us all?
Hello, welcome to another episode of Gameworms. I am Reil, and today we're going to be discussing another faction of Twilight Imperium 4. And this is the final video. I don't know, you're probably not watching these in order, but out of 24 factions, this is number 24. So it's been a long journey to get here. Today we're going to be talking about the Yssaril Tribes, which are a really interesting faction. And they're one of the last ones to kind of show up in like the lore of Twilight Imperium. Because they were not a spacefaring race when they were first discovered. They are actually, they have a planet, I think it was Reptilian. Yes, so there's a root called Menroot that grows on the planet of Reptilian, which revolves around the Myok star. And so the Yssaril have two planets, Shellock and Reptilian. But on Reptilian, there is a planet called Menroot, which was really, really popular during the reign of the Lazaks. And so the Lazaks would have little colonies living there. And at first it was kind of small colonies, and they would harvest this apparently very delicious root. But at some point during the reign of one of the Lazak's emperors, and his name's on the card here, Munhan Las Idu. So he decided he wanted more of this Menroot, so he basically expanded colonizing operations. So all of a sudden there was just a huge amount more of Lazaks and other, mostly Lazaks, but other people probably as well, hanging out on Reptilian. And it was at this time they started to notice that equipment was getting sabotaged. Farms were being ruined, patrols would disappear. And so they realized something funky was going on. And they soon discovered, after some period of time, they discovered that there was these little green guys with big yellow eyes living in the swamps and other areas. And they had the ability to almost disappear. So I don't know if it's so much as camouflage. They refer to it as fading, so maybe turning like kind of partially invisible or something. But really, really good at hiding. So they'd been living here for who knows how long, many, many, many years alongside the Lazaks. And nobody had known they were there because they were just so good at hiding, and they have networks of tunnels and things that they live in, and their cities are all hidden. So they didn't know these guys were there. But once they started expanding, the Yssaril started fighting back. And so they would send out people hunt them down, to stop them from damaging all the farms and equipment and everything. And at that time, so initially the Yssaril didn't have like a lot of technology. So, they're fighting with like spears and bows and whatever. But they started getting a hold of all this more advanced weaponry and figuring out how to use it. So they became more and more deadly. So these like swamps and marshlands on Retillion were basically just, these Lazax patrols were just getting slaughtered everywhere. So the primary place they live is a huge swamp called the Fiani Swamp, if I'm not saying that. So anyways, the Lazax were sending huge forces down there to kind of suppress the uprising. They're taking captives and prisoners and learning something about them. But they were never really successful in completely quelling the uprisings. But what happened was, with all these guys that were, all these Yssaril that were being like captured and taken prisoner and taken off planet, people started to notice, well, these guys are really, really good spies. They're really good at hiding, gathering information. Apparently they learn quickly as well, because they were, picking up on all this tech that they were taken from the Lazax. And so they started operating as, spies and assassins and things like that. So this gave them a fair bit of prominence in the galaxy, and so they were, at some point, they gained enough prominence that they were able to tell the Lazax, or ask the Lazax to please get off of Retillion, which they did, in exchange for trade for Menroot and stuff like that. So at this point, they started to become one of the great factions, and over the next century or so, they continued to learn to use all the new technologies and things like that. So even though they started off as kind of a, maybe like a Stone Age faction, in the course of, maybe a couple centuries, they became a spacefaring faction because of their contact with the Lazax. So since that time, they don't allow people on Retillion. They actually have two planets, Shalak and Retillion. Retillion's like where their capital city is, and it's called, I think, Weka. But they don't let anybody go there. Nobody knows where it is. So they have a city on Shalak, and there's one city where they actually let visitors. Well, they have a city on Shalak named Mojeb, and that's one of two places where they'll receive visitors and ambassadors and things. And the other one, they have a space station called, just give me a second here. Oh, yeah. So they have an orbital station called Harsu. I'm not really sure how to say it. But, so these are the two places that they'll let visitors come. But other than that, they don't like anybody on, at least Retillion. So, very secretive. And they are, if you remember, or you've seen the video I did on the Nalu, so they were actually, the Nalu were discovered even after the Yssaril. Because, their psychic powers kind of made it so that nobody could remember their visits to that part of space. But actually, it says in their faction description that the Yssaril did know they were there. So for a long time, the Yssaril were the ones feeding information into the Nalu as well. So, okay, so they're led by a Guild of Spies is their government. So that, the guilds that formed after they booted... during the time they were gaining prominence, right before they booted the Lazax, I guess, they were, build up these huge guilds of spies and assassins, and these basically started to form their government. And they're led by a feller lady, I don't know, the Sikark. I don't know how to say a lot of these words, I apologize. Yeah, so that is the Yssaril in a nutshell. Their specialty is being sneaky and spying, and game-wise, this translates to a lot of action cards. So you think of action cards in the game as kind of efforts of espionage and intelligence and things like that. And so they really shine in that area, as well as a couple other really neat abilities we're going to take a look at. So to start off, their starting technology. So one of my favorite starting technologies is Neural Motivators, which allows you to take an extra action card when you draw your action cards. But for them, that's perfect. Which we'll see soon when we get to their faction abilities. They also have a really good starting fleet. So they have 2 carriers, a cruiser, 2 fighters, 5 infantry, a space dock, and a PDS. So they have 2 carriers, and they have very quick, easy expansion with 2 carriers and a whole bunch of infantry. So the early game, pretty strong faction. Let's take a look at their faction abilities. They used to be... Let's take a look at stall tactics, and this is interesting because I remember in Twilight Imperium 3, a lot of people considered Yssaril Tribes very overpowered. And to the point where I've heard of people that would even ban them from their games. Which I don't think is necessary. But it's because they had the ability to stall a turn. They just couldn't do it twice in a row. So it was basically stall tactics, but they've added a cost to it. So right now it's action, discard one action card from your hand. So they have to pay action cards now to skip turns. Still a pretty strong ability. Why would you ever want to skip a turn? A lot of times there's a situation where you want to go last. So let's say you need a planet for an objective, and you don't want anyone to take it from you because you need it for the status phase to score it. Well, you want to take it last so nobody else is going to be able to come in and take it away from you. So going last can be a very powerful ability. Scheming. When you draw one or more action cards, draw one additional action card. Then choose and discard one action card from your hand. So that's pretty nice. So with Neural Motivator, every status phase you're drawing 2 action cards instead of 1. And with scheming, you actually get to draw 3. Now you're discarding 1, but that just means you get more of a pick to streamline your strategy. Crafty, one of their more famous abilities. You can have any number of action cards in your hand. Game effects cannot prevent you from using this ability. So normally you have a hand limit of 7 with action cards, and if you draw beyond that, you have to discard some. They just kind of have an unlimited number. And there's, even if a law is passed that restricts hand size further, doesn't affect them. So you got to watch out for these guys' action cards deck. They don't have anything spectacular in terms of regular units. Their flagship is a little bit interesting. The Yssaril. This ship can move through systems that contain other players' ships. And so you'll notice it has a move of 2. Most flagships only move 1, but obviously the ability it has would be meaningless if it could only move 1. It has a good combat, 5 attack with 2 dice. So it's pretty decent. The speed, I think, is really what makes this flagship. Even without its moving through fleet ability, the speed of 2 is pretty nice for a flagship. Now let's take a look at their faction technologies. So both of them are green. So they start with Neural Motivators, which is a green. So they already have the prerequisite for this first one. Transparasteel Plating. During your turn of the action phase, players that have passed cannot play action cards. And why might that be useful? Well, again, when you're combining this with an ability like stall tactics, this means you can wait until the end of a round, till after everyone's passed and start doing combats. And then you can be assured that they're not going to be playing any action cards during your combat. So it's just a good way to really control that element of the fight. Their other faction technology is a green. It's a lot more expensive. The Magion Implants, it's a 3 green. But you know what? The Hypermetabolism is a level 2 green. So it's a really good gateway. That's a really good one that lets you get an extra command counter every status phase. So it's really easy to go really deep into the green with these guys. And I think this is a good ability. So as an action, exhaust this card to look at another player's hand of action cards. Choose one of those cards and add it to your hand. And in this case, I'd be looking for those sabotage cards. You don't want those. Those are the one. Well, those and the extra instinct training abilities are kind of your nemesis in this game. So that gives you a chance to take some sabotage cards, not only that you have them, but they're not being used against you. All right, let's take a look at their planets, because I kind of discussed them in the lore, but I forgot to discuss their actual contribution to the game. So we have Shellock, which is, again, this is their crappier planet that they'll actually let you visit. It's got resources of 1, influence of 2, but their real special planet that they seem to prize is Reptilian. So that's a resource of 2 and 3 influence. So not a ton of projection. So you do have the advantage of a 2-planet system, which is nice if you double dock it and you can build more units on there. But 3 production, lots of influence, but yeah, not so great with production. But you start with 2 carriers and a lot of infantry, so I don't think it's as urgent as some other factions. You're pumping out a ton of units right away anyway. Let's take a look at their other stuff. Their mech. So their mech, the Black Shade Infiltrator. So it has a deploy ability, which I've discussed in other videos, but in case you haven't seen them, deployability is a way to bring a unit out without using the normal production. And so this is introduced with Prophecy of Kings. So you can always buy it, so it has a cost of 2. You could always buy it normally if you wanted to. But you can also deploy. So after you use your Stall Tactics faction ability, you may place 1 mech on a planet you control. So this is, instead of paying for it in the production step, you can actually just place one down when you use Stall Tactics. So that's pretty nice and a pretty easy one to get out. Let's take a look at their leaders. So they have I don't think anybody could argue they have the best agent in the game, named Yssaril. This card has the text ability of each other player's agent, even if that agent is exhausted. So he's just any other agent at the table, he can do, each round he can pick one of them and do that thing. So it's really nice if you're in with the Nomad too, because the Nomad has 3 agents, right? So it gives you more options, but yeah. So nobody's ever going to have a better leader than you. You're always going to be at least equally good and more adaptable. All right, their commander, Soata. He's unlocked by having 7 action cards, which will take a couple rounds at least, even with your special abilities. After another player activates a system that contains your units, you may look at that player's action cards, promissory notes, or secret objectives. May or may not be a deterrent depending what they're hanging on to, but it's, potential. It's just a passive ability. It's just always active. So that's pretty good. Not great, but it's good. All right, and then the hero the ability is called the Guild of Spies. The hero himself is Kyver, Blade and Key. And this is unlocked, of course, by having 3 objectives claimed. So as an action, each other player shows you 1 action card from their hand. For each player, you may either take that card or force that player to discard 3 random action cards from their hand. Then purge this card. So as far as heroes go, this isn't upper tier for me, but these guys do have a lot of other things going for them. But what I do like about this is that people aren't just going to be showing you their crappiest cards, because they don't want to have to if they have something they're holding on to and they want to keep, they're not going to risk probably having to discard 3 at random. So even if they're not going to show you the one they're really trying to hang on to, they'll probably show you something good enough that you'll want to keep it. So you should get some decent action cards out of that. And if not, you're at least thinning out their options. So these guys are very much in control of the action card game. Their promissory note is called the Spy Net. The start of your turn. So again, promissory notes, you don't use this. You give this to somebody else as part of a deal so they can use it. Look at the Yssaril player's hand of action cards. Choose one of those cards and add it to your hand. Then return this card to the Yssaril player. So you're basically giving someone the opportunity to steal one of your action cards at any point. So, I don't know if I'd give that one up. I mean, obviously, if you don't have anything in your hand you care about, you might as well. But it's just at some point in the future, if they play that on you, you don't know when that's going to come out, pull out your sabotage, work against you. So I'd be careful handing this thing out anyways, but there we go. So for the anthem, I've waffled a little bit on what I think the anthem should be for the Yssaril, but I think I've gone back to my original idea. It's the perfect song for a faction of spies and assassins who rely very much on being able to sneak around without being noticed. And so, of course, the anthem is John Cage's 433. Well, thank you, and have a wonderful evening. I will be thinking of what types of videos I want to make next. Out of the ones I've made so far, these faction summaries have been my favorite, but now that's over. So we'll see what happens next. Anyways, great evening. Have a good evening and good gaming.
And now, a performance of John Cage's 433. Please welcome our soloist, William Marks.
You